Do you know, it's a treat and a privilege when you can meet with a journalist who you've admired for years. You've met at sort of dinners and awards where I never get anything and she gets everything. But now we have some time together in the studio. I speak of the legendary Christiane Amanpour, who is launching today. Christiane Amanpour Presents the X-Files with Jamie Rubin. And that's X as in your ex-husband, who, Christiane, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
I either call him Mr. Rubin, James, or Sir.
Or Your Honour, whatever it is, yeah.
But you call him Jake. How long were you married?
We were married 20 years.
Right.
And divorced 7.
Okay.
And it took a while, but we decided that the conversation was worth picking up again on many, many fronts, but certainly because of the way the world is.
Yep.
And we have this experience for the longest time with him in government, me on the front lines.
Just remind everybody who Mr. Rubin was.
I certainly will, of course. I forgot.
No.
He used to work for the Biden administration and the Clinton administration at the State Department. So he was spokesperson for the Secretary of State in the Clinton administration. Then he worked on issues including the Middle East for Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the Biden administration that just ended.
Where did you guys catch up going back 20 plus years? How did you meet?
Well, we met hilariously in the Security Council at the United Nations in New York. I think he kind of fancied me.
Of course.
And I'd been on the front lines.
Viewers around the planet
Yeah. Well, I had been on the front lines in Bosnia, and Bosnia was the big thing that the US was trying to figure out. And I was constantly really sort of raining on their parade and calling them to account and, being outraged at this ethnic cleansing and genocide and the slaughter of civilians in Europe. This was the first war after World War II, after Never Again. This was happening in Europe, and it happened to be on my watch as a young journalist, and him as a young government official. So we met in the Security Council. He brought Madeleine Albright to meet me, who at the time said that CNN was there was the CNN factor, and it was the 16th member of the Security Council. In other words, that was the influence it had.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah. So then we met on a flight that she was taking to the Balkans, and then the rest is history.
Well, the rest is history, and now, of course, we can get some of it here on one of our global podcasts. So I'm coming back to you in a moment, but I'm just going to have a sneak preview because this will be out later today in time for your commute home. Here's Christiane and Jamie speaking about his recent involvement in those Middle East peace talks and how close he says the Biden administration came to a breakthrough in the deal.
First of all, Jamie, you were involved. I mean, I didn't even know, but you were involved in some recent diplomacy with the Palestinians.
I worked with Secretary Blinken on an actual plan to end the war in Gaza. So we had the hostage talks going on all the time, trying to get hostages out. But we knew that you could never get them all out and you could never end the conflict unless you had a plan. And working very, very closely with the Israelis, with the UAE, and working with some outside players. And sometimes in diplomacy, the best ideas often come from outside the government. And Tony Blair and I became sort of best buddies because we talked on the phone a lot. And he was someone who was able to meet privately with Netanyahu, privately with MBS. And so what we came up with was an actual proposal for an international force that would run between Israel and the Palestinian local police. And it would prevent Hamas from ever again rearming and rebuilding its capabilities so that it could ever again do what it did on October 7th. And the Israelis bought into this. And we got their agreement to fully withdraw from Gaza.
More details of how you can get that podcast in a moment. Christiane, I want to come to you a little bit. You are the face of CNN. You've been a reporter, a presenter, a foreign correspondent. You're now chief international anchor. You've travelled the world more times than many. What have you learned about journalism from what you've done?
Well, about journalism, I've learned that you have to be there. You can't not go into the field and expect to know what's going on. You have to be there. And as you heard Jamie said, sometimes the best, most important ideas and also information come from outside the official channels, come from talking to people, whether they're leaders or ordinary civilians or soldiers on the front lines or whoever it is. So my absolute belief, and I bring this into the podcast after 35 years of being a foreign correspondent, is that there's no shortcuts. You cannot cut being a foreign correspondent, or actually even a correspondent in your own country, if you want to get the real news. But what I've also learned, and I hope this really does come through on this podcast, is that for some reason, politics, society, culture has become so toxic that you can barely get people on opposing sides into the same room.
Why the toxicity?
Because it's just become weaponized. Everything has become weaponized. Somehow, politics and government has gone from trying to solve issues to actually not solving them.
But aren't you and I guilty of giving these folks
Well,
the megaphone?
that's what I'm saying.
24-hour rolling coverage. Aren't we partly to blame?
Potentially, and yes, and that's why on my program I tried to bring, and this is at CNN, I tried to bring opposing sides together. On this podcast, where I have an opportunity to talk to a government official, I was a journalist, we both did the same things from different sides of the aisle, and a divorced couple, to talk about what went wrong, what went right, what could be the solutions, what did we learn, what were the failures, what were the successes. I genuinely think it's valuable and it's indispensable. And as he said, Jamie, sometimes the best ideas come from outside government. The Oslo peace process were Norwegian civil servants who brought Palestinians and Israelis together at a time when Israel wasn't even allowed by law to talk to the PLO in the early 1990s. So it was dramatic.
So you've interviewed, you've had on your show, you've covered the good, the bad and the ugly, as it were. Who's the last politician you walked away from and you thought, my God, they've got something about them?
So,
they light up the room.
Yes, it's hard to actually put my finger on right now. But look, I tell you who. I mean, I'm just going to light on it. I thought the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, was incredibly impressive. I have interviewed many people who are not necessarily leaders, but in the second and third layer, who maybe talk a little bit are freer to talk, who I find incredibly open and willing to come and have a debate. I find some of the most impressive people in the security and defense establishment, whether it's the Israelis, not so much the Palestinians at the moment because there's no opportunity, whether it's Britain, America or whatever, because they understand what it takes to keep a nation safe, and it's not always wrapped up in the politics of the leaders. And I think that's really important to remember. And then I would say, a lot of the people who I admire most and I find, very, very interesting, some of the Israeli rabbis, Jewish rabbis who I've interviewed, Americans and others, who have talked about how we cannot continue this politics of hatred. We have to be able to talk and somehow settle our differences.
If we want to settle differences, we're coming to the end of our chat together, but if we're coming to that idea, how helpful to that ambition is someone such as Donald J. Trump?
It's very interesting because he is in the Middle East right now, in the Persian Gulf area. He's at Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, all really important players in the region, none of which are at war with Israel, by the way. So that's a whole different thing. It's been said that he's not there for geopolitics or a peace deal, but for business deals. He's also very transactional. So will business translate into peace? Hard to tell. You'll see what we have to say about it on our podcast. But already the Times of Israel is reporting that it was a unilateral engagement between Trump and his administration and presumably Hamas to get the last remaining Israeli-American hostage out. It was a soldier, an IDF soldier, Eden Alexander.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's apparently without the Israeli government playing a role in that. What does that all mean? It also, Times of Israel is saying that Steve Witkoff, Trump's main envoy, is basically saying to the families of the hostages, again, this has been reported by the Times of Israel, I'd have to double check it, but that their government, the US, believes the Israeli government is needlessly extending the Gaza war. And thus, the result is putting the hostages still at risk. And, the Israeli themselves have said that Netanyahu has said, the radical right has said, Smotrich and the others, that getting the hostages out is not our main objective. It's not our first objective. We have to destroy Hamas. Well, that goes contrary to what the majority of Israel, and clearly the hostage families, believes.
Last couple of questions. If you look at the summer riots here in the UK, if you look at MAGA in the US, if you look at the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jackets in France, there is such anger, or your word, toxicity. Do you ever see that dissipated?
I hope so, and I think it takes leadership. But I will say it really does take leadership who is willing to not jump on the bandwagon of weaponizing every single issue. You've just been talking about immigration.
Yeah.
But I also believe that our social media world has made this so much more difficult. The whole echo chambers, the whole ability to exponentially increase the broadcast of these, conflict messages, because that's what social media and the algorithms thrive on, conflict.
Okay.
So it makes our job a million times more difficult, but I think more important.
Okay, my last question, and I am going to put it to Jamie, or James Rubin next time I speak to him. What is his greatest strength and what is his greatest weakness?
So
and I
think
will
he's
ask
brilliant.
James of you.
I think he's brilliant, and he's a brilliant analyst, and he's been there through all these, and he's willing to think outside the box, as you see in that clip. I think his greatest weakness is he interrupts me a lot.
He's a journalist. I wouldn't dream of doing it. This is the new global podcast. Christiane Amanpour presents The X-Files with Jamie Rubin. Privilege having you on board. Good luck
Thank
with
you,
it.
Nick.
Welcome to Global.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.